And it is 7 a.m., so I think we get started here shortly. For those that are on now, you should be able to see this welcoming slide here. So all participants are automatically muted when you come into the Zoom session, but you're welcome to interact with any of the panelists and with other attendees through your chat feature. And you are welcome to send me a message if you're having any issues with your view or have any questions about the interface. You're also welcome to customize your view as a participant. You have different options along where the video screen is, or it might be in your Zoom tools along the top of your screen, depending on what kind of computer you're using and what version of Zoom you have and things like that. We are going to have Q&A for all of the sessions, and you're welcome to access that feature as well. So if you have a question for a panelist, you're welcome to push the Q&A button and then send your questions to us. I do ask that you identify who your question is for, which presenter your question is for, just to make it easier to get that to them. And then I will collect all of the questions and we'll go through those towards the end. And then finally, again, please do feel free to use the chat feature to interact with everyone. And you can send private messages by choosing who your recipient is, or you can send it to all panelists or to all attendees of the conference. So with that, my name again is Alex Niedermeyer, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here with you today, albeit virtually. My name is Matt Somerville. I'll be your moderator today. I work for the USAID Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program, usually based in Zambia, and I'll be returning home on Friday this week. So thank you all for joining today's webinar and symposium opening. Many of you, of the folks who are arriving right now, have been a part of this for many years. And even though Zambia is opening up with schools and churches, in an abundance of caution, you know, USAID and our program are not promoting travel, between urban centers or non-essential travel across the country. When we were organizing this event, the dynamics of COVID-19 were not clear. And so we decided to try this in a new format, a virtual format. We hope to learn from it. I'm sure we'll make some mistakes, but we hope that you all will bear with us and also give advice, and we can figure out how to do this more effectively. And I think the wonderful thing is that we can bring in more folks from across the country through this event. We do have a mechanism through the registration in case you need to be connected. We can provide internet bundles. So if you have colleagues who would like to join, please advise. Unlike past years where this event has been a 2 or 3 day symposium, we decided to split this into 4 weeks because sitting on a computer or on a phone and battery life can be draining. So we're now going to have this event across 4 weeks and have 2 2-hour sessions each week. Typically on a Wednesday and Thursday from 13 to 15. So please do join us tomorrow and Thursday. Each week we'll focus on a theme, and we'll have about 8 to 10 presentations on those themes and discussion. Tomorrow we'll be talking about state and customary land governance. Next week, the focus will be on state and customary land documentation in the National Titling Program. On the week of the 21st and 22nd, there will be a focus on forest and wildlife management. And then finally, in the last week of October, we'll be discussing integrated development planning. So we really do hope that you all feel comfortable to join in and drop out when you need to, but hopefully join in and share the word. You know, we've had over 200 people express interest from across Zambia. So we really do think this is a great place to share the diversity of case studies and experiences from academics and practitioners. Many individuals have presented before and are bringing back new analyses, deeper analyses. The top presentation / paper from this month will be invited to present at an international conference when things open up a bit. So in a moment, I will introduce us to today's opening speakers with their reflections. In this opening session, we have the opportunity to hear from government ministries, departments, and customary leaders who have a management role in Zambia's state and customary land in urban and peri-urban and rural areas. We've typically done this as a bit of a policy introduction each year. But what we hope you all can do is send in your questions and thoughts on the chat box. We may have space at the end of each presentation to pose some specific questions, but I think what we also want to do is to encourage finding areas of discussion between ministries, between departments, and between actors. We have representation from the House of Chiefs here as well today to think about how to improve and effectively coordinate land management. So without much further ado, I just did want to take a moment before we start to reflect on the passing of Dr. Emmanuel Mutale in March. Dr. Mutale was a champion for this event. He spearheaded its organization last year. You know, he was one of the great land champions in Zambia and was really dedicated to bringing people together to help sort out some of these most challenging dynamics. And he really did believe that bringing people together and encouraging dialogue was the best way to work through these issues. His presence will certainly be missed. So with that, let's get this meeting started. I would like to introduce our host for this event for some introductory remarks before moving to our government representatives. Shauna Hirsch is the Deputy Director for Economic Growth Office at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Shauna has over 18 years of experience leading teams and managing U.S. government interagency priorities, particularly around combating wildlife trafficking, protecting biodiversity, and addressing climate change and building community and household resilience. So with that, I'd like to welcome Shauna and really look forward to folks using the chat box and the questions and answers to have an engaging virtual discussion. Thanks, Shauna.
Great, thanks very much, Matt, and welcome everyone. So Chief Kafuto, Chair of the House of Chiefs, and Linda Swale, the Director of Planning, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, Chuma Simakonda, the Acting Director for the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and Ignatius Makumba, Director of the Forestry Department, Ministry of Local Government officials present, and ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. On behalf of the U.S. Mission and USAID Zambia, it's my pleasure to join you for the Integrated Land and Resources Governance Program Annual Research Symposium. Today marks the 5th time in the past 6 years that USAID has supported Zambian academics, civil society, government, and traditional leaders to assemble at a national level to consider the state of land tenure and resource governance in Zambia. This year's symposium is unique, as Matt pointed out, in that it's being hosted entirely online. And we're excited that this opens up participation to many additional stakeholders. So land and resource rights are central to Zambia's development trajectory and its movement forward on its journey to self-reliance. USAID has been collaborating with the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, the House of Chiefs, the Forestry Department, and the Ministry of Local Government across 4 main areas. The first is women's economic empowerment. The second is documenting customary land rights with households and communities to advance economic growth and development. The third is on community-based natural resource management across both forestry and wildlife sectors. And the fourth is integrated development planning with local authorities and traditional leaders. So over the past 6 years, USAID has supported 9 traditional leaders in documenting the household rights of almost 100,000 people across over 30,000 parcels of land. USAID has also partnered with the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources to finance stakeholder consultations across sectors and in provinces and districts regarding the national land policy. The process of clarifying rights has the potential to exclude certain segments of society, including women, youth, and other vulnerable populations. Not only has USAID worked with our partners to ensure inclusion in rights registration, we are also working on promoting gender norms that encourage male leaders to become champions for women's land rights. Through our partners, USAID is also helping women gain skills for employment and self-advocacy while ensuring that these initiatives do not place them at increased risk of gender-based violence. At USAID, we believe in the importance of cross-stakeholder and multi-sector dialogue to advance development objectives and help Zambian communities manage their own development journey. Land and resources planning and discussions are an excellent forum for doing just that. Cross-sectoral discussions involving agriculture, forestry, land governance and rights, and wildlife management provide an opportune foundation for developing integrated programs and collaboration. For example, supporting community forests helps stem the challenges of habitat loss for wildlife and improves rural women's access to and control over economic resources. This has an overall positive effect on a range of development goals, since rural women are at the strategic center of reducing hunger, malnutrition, and poverty, and they play a central role in household food security, dietary diversity, and children's health. By working with traditional leadership and civil society, voices are increasingly heard at the national level that capture the realities of the limitations facing communities in exercising their rights and dealing with education, health, and economic challenges. The role of academia is extremely important in shared learning and for making sure that Zambians not only learn from their experiences and the practices of other countries, but also that Zambians are able to participate on the global stage. For that reason, as Matt mentioned, the top paper produced during this conference will be awarded the chance to present at the next World Bank Land and Poverty Conference in Washington, D.C., expected in 2021. As Zambia finalizes the national land policy and implements its wildlife, forestry, and natural resource management framework, dialogue and national learning should remain at the forefront. We are very honored to be partners in this dialogue and are grateful for the diverse stakeholders present today and over the course of the month. So on behalf of USAID, I thank you for your participation and accomplishments and appreciate your commitment and willingness to share your lessons learned in land and natural resources governance in Zambia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shauna. I wish I had some canned clapping so that we do feel a little more dynamism, but really appreciate those reflections as our attendance has swelled to 70 folks just in the past few minutes. So really a great thanks to USAID for their support of this work, and of course to our counterparts who are joining us. So thank you so much. We have ahead of us reflections from some of the various stakeholders and partners who have been involved in customary land management and state land management. Over the next about an hour, we'll hear from His Royal Highness Chief Kaputa, Chair of the House of Chiefs, Ms. Linda Sawale, Director of Planning at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, Ms. Ngozi Mutale from the Ministry of Local Government, Chuma Simukonda from the Director of the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and Ignatius Makumba, Director of Forestry. We're really grateful that you all have taken the time to come today and discuss the integration and the overlap of the various areas that your ministries and of course traditional leaders manage. So with that, I would like to welcome His Royal Highness Chief Kaputa. Chief Kaputa is the chair of the House of Chiefs, the current chairperson of the House of Chiefs. He's the chief of the Kabwa people of Northern Province for the past 15 years. He's trained as a mining engineer with a bachelor's and a master's of science in mining engineering, with over 30 years of experience in the private sector and within the Zambian government. Chief Kaputa has been a great champion in recent years of women's land rights, as well as the land policy, and really helping to ensure that the House of Chiefs is a vibrant place for dialogue amongst traditional leaders and with government, of course. With that, please welcome His Royal Highness Chief Kaputa. So I'll turn it over to you, and I believe you may still be on mute. Also, any presenters are welcome to use their video button as well, if they have it. Chief Kaputa. And
I just asked Chief Kaputa if he's able to unmute. So let's see here.
perfect. And of course, also very welcome to place any questions for Shauna and the USAID team in the chat box as well. We'll give it about 20 more seconds, and then we can move over to Ms. Sawale and try to resolve Chief Kaputa's settings while we wait. I'm sure this won't be the first connectivity snafu we have over the course of the next month. I should note that each week will be moderated by a different moderator, so you'll have the pleasure of hearing from different folks who are engaged in the technical areas. Okay. What I'll do now, in the interest of time, is invite Ms. Sawale. Thank you so much. Ms. Sawale, I hope you don't mind if I give a brief introduction. Ms. Linda Sawale is the Acting Director of Planning and Information at the Ministry of Lands. She leads the coordination of all development activities in the ministry, including programs and budgeting activities. She is also in charge of the parliamentary business, policy and planning, project management, and monitoring and evaluation. It's at this point, after so many years of Zambia working on the land policy, she may have the pleasure of bringing it to closure after 20-something years, and I hope we get to hear a little bit about that as she makes her presentation. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll mute my video. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. The Chief of Party, Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program, USAID, the National Coordinator, Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program, USAID, Royal Highnesses present, senior government officials and heads of various government institutions, cooperating partners here present, representatives from non-governmental organizations, civil society, private sector, other stakeholders, members of the press present, if any, ladies and gentlepersons. It gives me great pleasure to share this gathering of priority areas for Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. As you may be aware, the mandate of this ministry is to administer land and manage natural resources for sustainable land use and climate resilient low emission systems. In order to implement this mandate, the ministry has set for itself 3 key programs, namely land administration and regulation, natural resources management and support services. On the land administration and regulation, under this program, there are 3 sub-programs, which are land policy and management, land registration and titling, and land survey. The key focus areas under this program are the National Land Titling Program, finalization of the land policy, and reaffirmation of the international boundaries. The second sub-program, which is the natural resource management, under the natural resources management, skills development, climate change, and national resources management, and forestry management. Those that you stay in, we have a presentation from forestry. The key focus under this program are improvement of infrastructure, coordination of implementation of climate change projects, development of climate change bill, strengthening of sustainable forestry management by increasing numbers of community forest management groups, and development of a timber traceability system, which will trace the movement of timber from points of production to points of sale and exit within the country. Management and support services. Under this program, the key focus areas are review of the land-related legislation, development of a customary land administration bill, and enhancement of the land information system. As I conclude, let me take this opportunity to thank the Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program of the USAID for the support, both financially and technically, it has rendered to this ministry, particularly in the land reforms, and the ministry looks forward to close collaboration in the years to come. And as Marta stated, we are currently looking at the land policy, and I think we will see the finalization of this policy in a few months. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Suale. I'm sure that some of our participants will have some additional questions, particularly on the status of the land policy and maybe even the titling program or others. I hope they can write them into the chat box so that we can hear from folks there. Let's try again with His Royal Highness Chief Caputa. We were working on the headset issues just a few moments ago. I suppose, Chief Caputa, can we see if we can get your mic just now? You're still showing as muted on our side. Which would indicate on your screen there should be in the bottom left corner a microphone, I would think, that can be pressed, although it varies on every every screen, of course. Okay, not clear that it's come through yet, so let's move to our next opening presentation from the Ministry of Local Government. I believe there may be a set of slides here from Ngozi Mutale. Ms. Mutale is the Director of Planning and Information at the Ministry of Local Government. She coordinates planning and policy development in the ministry and is also in charge of coordinating projects with cooperating partners. I believe today she will present and reflect on the integrated development plan process. This has been of particular interest to USAID's ILRG program. In part because the Urban and Regional Planning Act really gives the first opportunity to work on development planning in customary areas between chiefs and communities and local government. So with that, Ngozi, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt. So allow me to write on the protocols as highlighted by the previous speakers. And yes, with that, I will really just be reflecting on the integrated development planning in Zambia and how that relates to the planning for the chiefdoms, as well as what has been done so far and how we expect to move forward. So next slide, basically, I'm looking at the outline. I'll briefly talk about the background to the integrated development planning in Zambia, what it is about, what it involves, that is the local area planning, the link between the IDPs and the local area planning, and then policy engagement relating to customary land. Next slide. So as a background, you will notice that the Urban and Regional Planning Act number 3 of 2015 is what really defines and provides guidance to the preparations of the integrated development plans. And it also improved the preparations of the plans. Basically, that is, it looks at how we can make the preparation of the IDPs more cost effective, more participatory, and more integrated. So it does also mandate all local authorities to prepare IDPs. So through this act, all local authorities are mandated. It's a legal requirement that they do prepare IDPs. You may ask what was happening previously. I mean, this is not to say that there was no form of planning in the local authorities. There was, and it was guided by the Town and Country Planning Act, CAP 283, which was really inherited from the British government. So it didn't look at the issues that guides the preparation of the IDPs. So it was actually, the plans were called structural development and structural plans, and were limited to only the district boundaries. Next slide. So with next slide, please. With the coming of the act, we've had to develop guidelines for IDPs, and these were developed and launched in 2019. And basically, the IDPs are the primary tools for implementation of the national development plan strategies at local level. So you will notice that IDPs draw their programs and from the national planning framework, the budgeting policy, and the 7th National Development Plan. So when preparing IDPs, the primary tools that are used are the National Development Plan, the Vision 2030, the 7th National Development Plan. So basically, they are a tool for implementing the planning framework, the national planning framework. And we are looking at, as we go to preparing the 8th National Development Plan, there's a stronger linkage now with the Ministry of National Development Plan to ensure that the IDPs and the plans are strongly linked. We do notice that the law and the guidelines for IDPs came way after the 7th National Development Plan. So we see that right now, when you look at the IDPs that have been prepared, in terms of the linkage with the national planning framework, it's still weak. So we are looking at strengthening it moving forward with the 8th National Development Plan. So next slide. So in summary, we would say that integrated development planning is basically a process of alignment and coordination through which a strategy for the development of a district is prepared, informed by the national planning framework, national planning and budgeting framework. Next slide. So, then integrated development plan is an overall framework for development within a district that guides and informs planning, budgeting, management, and decision-making by all levels of government and all actors within the district. So this is as defined in the Urban and Regional Planning Act, Section 19, subsection 3, and Section 19, subsection 5. So you will notice that in preparing the IDPs, there's a lot of emphasis in stakeholder engagement at all levels, but within the district. And when we look at the district, we are not limiting it to just the district boundaries, but it includes chiefdoms within a particular district. I'll still talk to that. So IDPs basically, next slide, aim to seek a balance between physical, social, economic, and environmental objectives in planning. Previously, when you look at the development and structural plans that were prepared, I think there was a lot more emphasis on physical planning. But now the IDPs emphasize a balance between all the aspects of planning, that is the physical, the social, economic, and the environmental objectives. So basically, that's why we look at engaging all the stakeholders in the planning process. The next slide. So now we'd like to look at the link between the IDP and the local area plan, or a LAP. So under Section 21, subsection 1 of the Urban and Regional Planning Act, a planning authority uses a local area plan as a planning instrument to provide detailed proposals for the development of an area designated for development under an integrated development plan. So as you will see later on, one of the stages that defines the development of an area is the local area plan. So within an IDP, you develop a planning, a local area plan, which is more of an instrument, or it provides a detail of a development to be undertaken in a particular area within the integrated development plan. So would probably explain it as a smaller component of an integrated development plan, which focuses on a particular area within the integrated development plan. So next slide. So the local area planning is one planning instrument that will be used in customary land. Because you may have heard earlier that when you look at the Urban and Regional Planning Act now, it does allow for planning within the customary areas. So it goes beyond the boundary of the district as we knew it, but also looks at planning in the customary area. So, however, we want to emphasize that this is subject to a planning agreement. And this planning agreement basically is a treaty that a planning authority signs with the traditional authorities, which allows the planning authority to undertake planning within a customary land under the provisions of the Urban and Regional Planning Act. So a local authority may, in order to develop a customary land and facilitate the implementation of an integrated development plan or a local area plan in the customary area, enter into planning agreements with one or more chiefs responsible for the customary land. So no planning can be undertaken by a planning authority without a planning agreement. Again, this is where our traditional leadership comes in, because we are looking at having to strengthen planning of the whole area within a district, but some areas are under customary land, and so it becomes difficult for the planning authority to plan on them. However, with the planning agreement, this would be a possibility. And so there's been a lot of engagement from our end with the traditional authority to explain the importance of these planning agreements and how they would actually facilitate a better development in the customary land. Next slide. So basically the summary of, as a summary of what I said, when you look at the hierarchy of plans under the, as defined by the Urban and Regional Planning Act, we look at the National Development Framework, which is defined, one for the socio-economic plan. We look at the National I was muted. I don't know if...
Oh, sorry, you were fine. You can continue. Apologies.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Thank you.
that's fine. Yeah. So I was talking about the National Development Framework, which is defined by two things. There's a National Spatial Development Framework. Now, I want to state that currently, the country has not yet developed the National Spatial Development Framework, but is in the process of doing it, working together with the Ministry of National Development Plan. And again, this has been recognized recognized in the planning and budgeting bill that is currently under discussion. So the ministry does coordinate the development of the National Spatial Development Framework, which should speak to the National Development Plan. Then from there, there's an integrated development plan, which is at a district level, guiding the physical, environmental, social, and economic development, prepared in an integrated manner and through various stakeholder engagements. Then from there, we have a localized plan, which is at sub-district level, giving more details to the development strategies of specific areas. And this is where now the planning for the traditional authority for areas or for land, which is under traditional authorities, comes in. So there's a lab that could be prepared under the customary lands, subject to the signing of a planning agreement. Next slide. So in conclusion and in summary, I'd just like to say that the Urban and Regional Planning Act, which was enacted in 2015, and working with based on that, the ministry has been developing subsidiary laws, particularly regulations. A number of them have already been developed, and we continue to develop them, and guidelines in accordance to the Act, which will facilitate the implementation of the Urban and Regional Act. Basically, the regulations and the guidelines are there to simplify the implementation of the Act. And so far, the general regulations were developed and they have since been gazetted, and we are in the process of preparing 3 more regulations as a ministry. Guidelines for preparations of IDPs have also been prepared and approved, and they are currently in use. And then the guidelines for the preparation of the LAPs and the planning agreements have not yet been prepared, but there are plans to prepare them because they are also a very important aspect of the planning. And we are looking at starting the preparation process now and hopefully concluding them sometime next year. So the guidelines basically will help provide a link between the IDP, the LAP, which is local area plan, the planning agreement, and the documentation of customary land. I thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Over to you.
Oops. Thank you so much, Ms. Mintali. That was really enlightening and continues to reinforce the role of the IDP process and the local area plans in development planning in districts. So very much appreciated, and I do hope that our district partners can submit some questions and even some of their experiences in the chat box or in the question and answer area so that we can pose some questions to you just after this, the next few presentations. I also note that a few questions have been coming to Ms. Sawale in the chat box, and we'll allow those to be highlighted a little bit later. I think of particular interest is, understanding the local area plans with customary leaders and how those are going, because I know there's probably a few out there, and how the IDPs are going in general. But I think the next presentation that we're very keen to have here follows quite well from the local government presentation. The Department of National Parks and Wildlife within the Ministry of Tourism and Arts does have a mandate to support the development of general management plans across the country's game management areas, of course. Dr. Chuma Simukonda is the acting director of Department of Parks and Wildlife. He has more than 27 years of experience, particularly in natural resource management, particularly in the wildlife sector. He's had many different portfolios and the chance to work with communities, private sector, and civil society, and a keen interest in research. One of the things that I think as a program we've been interested to see is this history of general management plans within the Department of National Parks, and how those can and will be integrated into the IDP process. USAID has a very strong interest in wildlife and natural resource management, and a strong partnership with the DNPW. Dr. Simukonda, I really have the pleasure of introducing you, and glad to hear from you for the next few minutes. So feel free to unmute and give yourself a video, and we'll be pleased to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Yeah, all protocols observed. The Department of National Parks and Wildlife has a background. It has gone through transitions from the first Department of National Park, their Wildlife Authority, and Wildlife. The two Department of National Parks and Wildlife Services was pure government, and the current is also a pure government, whilst the ZAWA, commonly called ZAWA, was actually parastatal. This department draws its mandate to manage wildlife resources from the Zambia Wildlife Act of number 14 of 2015. And the in this mandate, 36 game management areas and 20 national parks. And as you may know, wildlife does not just exist in these protected areas, it being a fugitive resource. It exists also in the non-protected areas, which we commonly call open areas. So our mandate really spills over into those areas because of the existence of wildlife in all the areas. Now, the national parks, which are 20, are kind of islands where we have people do not stay there. The people don't live in those areas. They're purely for conservation areas. Whilst in game management areas, these areas, people live there and they live normally. So the principal focus on is what happens in game management areas, because this is where we have multiple uses, and that's where maybe a lot of issues come from. National parks, I wouldn't say much because they are heavily protected and we don't have as many issues other than poaching and other management challenges. The issues may not be as multiple as in game management areas. So in the 36 game management areas, we actually have much of the wildlife landscape, these wildlife protected areas. They cover about 1/3 of Zambia's landmass. And so the landscape for managing wildlife is really broad and diverse, which means that we really need to be everywhere if we are to follow the normal approach of government officials being the ones to manage these resources alone. And that approach has been proven not to work at all. So in game management areas, we largely depend on the cooperation of stakeholders, the key stakeholders that we have there. And the key stakeholders are local communities and the private sector. And so because of this partnership, we kind of form a triangular partnership involving the communities, the private sector, and government. Now, obviously, for communities to really participate in the conservation of wildlife resources, they need to have a reason why they can participate in the conservation of these resources. And because of this, we truly believe that wildlife resources need to benefit the local people who live with them. And so there's a system of beneficiation from wildlife resources. We also do realize that wildlife does not really exist in isolation. It exists in a holistic context where we have got to manage what maintains wildlife in those areas. It means that we need to look at management of wildlife from a context of ecosystems or the habitats in which they are found. And because of that, we need to manage not only wildlife as the animals, but we need to manage wildlife in the context in which they live. It means that we need to look after forests, we need to look after water resources, we need to look after land resources, we need to look after fisheries, and everything else that really pertains to an ecosystem arrangement. And we know that we can of communities. So communities to see the value in these wildlife resources, we have a scheme based on the philosophy of managing resources based on the communities who live with these resources. And the scheme is to share whatever is generated from one ratio. And currently, the ratio is 50% of the revenue that is generated from the wildlife resources. 50% is taken to the state because they are state resources or they are national resources. And the other 50 is given to local communities, people that live with these resources. Of the 50% that goes to communities, 5% is given to the patron or matron of a particular area, who happen to be chiefs or leaders, traditional leaders. And if you take the 45% that communities have, if you take it as a whole, if you take it as 100, that 45 kwacha or $45, if you take it as a whole, then you have 100. Then 45% of that goes to resource management, and 35 goes to development, and 20% goes to administration of resource boards. So that brings me to the point of the resource boards. The community resource boards are a governance structure that ensures that resources are managed and the benefits are spread, or benefits are used for the benefit of all. So the community resource boards are structured in a manner that you have somebody who takes care of accounts, and another who is chair, and another who is secretary. Then you have the committees under this resource board. These committees can be natural resource management, financial management, development committee, and you can have multiple committees depending on what a community resource board may determine as necessary. Now, I would like to beg your pardon. It is actually not community resources board. Resources, because we believe that communities themselves need to manage all the resources in their areas for their benefit. It means that they don't just focus on wildlife, they focus on all the resources in their areas. And this could be land, fisheries, water, forests, and all the natural resources that could be in a particular area of a game management area are managed through the community resources board organization. Now, it is important that as communities manage these resources, the game management area itself is well planned as a Hello? Hello?
Yes, we're with you now.
Okay, that's fine. I don't
Thank
know
you.
where I was cut from.
Just about 10 seconds,
So
maybe 5-10 seconds.
Come again?
You were only cut for about 5 or 10
Mark?
seconds.
Yes, okay, that's fine. So the resources in a particular area need to be managed in such a manner that the spatial positioning of people and activities of people in the government management area, it being a multiple use area, should be organized. This calls for planning. It calls for the community coming together to formulate a plan, a general management plan, or land use plan. And in this plan, communities sit down with the assistance of the Department of National Parks and Wildlife. They sit down and zone out the game management area and say this particular area will be for settlement, this will be for mining, or this can be for development, and this is going to be for wildlife, and this is going to be for particular use. So the whole landmass of a game management area is zoned. And these general management plans are actually recognized in the Wildlife Act. So they are actually law. So once it is ratified, then it becomes law, and anyone who lives in a game management area needs to adhere to what is pronounced in the GMP, the General Management Plan. Most people ask, how can people encroach in a game management area when people are allowed to live there? The encroachment is in the context of this general management plan. If it is determined that a particular area will be for wildlife management, then people are not allowed to live in those areas. And if they happen or they decide to stray there, then it becomes encroachment into the wildlife area. This is what is happening in game management areas like Mumbwa, and even some national parks like Lower Zambezi, and many others really, and there are a lot of encroachments that we have. So the general management plan is what is used to manage resources or for people to be able to live a normal life in GMAs without being interfered with as they have trespassed in this or that. As long as they follow what is in the GMP, then they are okay, they are justified. Even mining can take place in GMAs, in game management areas. Even mining can. But please remember that in game management areas, the principal land use is wildlife management. That's the principal land use. So you can even have a farm there, you can have a mine, you can have whatever you'd like to establish, but what is really of prime importance is that your activity should not really come in the way of wildlife management. So it is encouraged that whatever activities you have there must be compatible with the management of wildlife. The assumption there is that wildlife is sufficient to create an economy for the local people. Now, I know people could ask if we have any area that has a successful wildlife economy, and people are completely depending on that. Yes and no. There are very few areas where the wildlife economy can support communities. They are there. However, we are still on the path of evolving to the stage where communities are able to manage their resources and earn from there in the complete sense. We are still on the path of development as far as that is concerned. Remember, I talked about sharing of revenue and 50%. We are in the process of which will spell out the exact terms of sharing these benefits. In the past, or maybe can I say currently, the sharing is only with, you may know, it is not just from hunting. It also, people can also benefit from animals that are being translocated from their areas. People that are residing in those areas and setting lodges in those areas, they are using part of their land. They need to have land user fees. And these land user fees should not just go to government, but should be shared with communities. So there are quite a number of resources that really people can benefit from. Now, we are just talking about benefits from wildlife resources. But how about the other resources in their community areas, like minerals, fisheries and forests? How are they benefiting? And so it made us think that it may be necessary for us to have a community-based natural resource management policy that can guide us as government and community and be benefited from. We are in the process of developing the CBNRM policy. It's almost to completion, but not yet there. We hope that this will really guide communities and government to ensure that communities do not just benefit from wildlife, but they'll benefit from every resource that is in their area. The question that you would ask is, where can this policy sit? Obviously, if it sits in wildlife, then wildlife is going to be very biased in its implementation. And if it sits in lands, then it's going to be biased also. So really the problem that we had initially was who will really host this policy. We went about, and I think it caused the delays in its progression, and finally decided, let it sit in the Ministry of Tourism. After all, much of the community-based programs emanated from the roots of wildlife. And maybe at some point in future, we may decide the appropriate positioning of the CBNRM policy. Have I covered enough grounds? Okay, so for now, I think I'll rest it there and maybe wait for questions that could come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simakonda. Indeed, there have been a number of questions that have come on the side chats, and you're welcome to look at those along the way, or we can come back to them individually as we wrap up discussions after the following two presentations. I think your presentation started to bring us towards the very questions that this research symposium continues to look at each year. Ministry of Lands is looking at boundaries and clarifying rights and supporting administrative boundaries and the like. When you get to the Department of Wildlife and then Forestry Department in a few minutes, we'll be talking about benefits. What's actually coming out of that land and how do communities and government, private sector and leaders share those benefits? And what are the governance structures for doing that? I think your descriptions of the community-based natural resource management policy and the role of CRBs is very enlightening on the space to discuss any given one of these resources. I think your notes about the game management areas and the planning that occurs on there brings in the Ministry of Local Government, which, as we had just heard, is now working much more on a district level plan. And of course, many of the GMAs that were, that cover 20% of the country, that were pristine habitat 20, 30 years ago, are now, in many cases, may or may not be compatible with wildlife, where farming has been there dramatically. So I think this sort of starts to bring together the role of planning, the role of integrated planning, and the resource that we're looking at. In our next two presentations, we have the Department of Forests, or the Forestry Department, followed by final reflections from the House of Chiefs. The Forestry Department, of course, has one of the most new, I'd say, regulations or approaches in Zambia with community-based forestry. And it really is a leader in terms of all of Africa and the world, frankly, in terms of the legal framework around community-based forestry management. So I'm very pleased to have the chance to introduce Ignatius Makumba, the Director of Forestry. He's been within the Ministry of Lands. He's served at various levels of government since 1991 within the Forestry Department, Zambia Forestry College, and the Environment and Natural Resource Management Department. He's been involved in policy formulation as well as coordination with cooperating partners. Mr. Makumba, thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to your reflections on the advances within the Forestry Department. Although I do have some fear that he may have fallen off in the past few moments. We just need to elevate him to speaker, Alex, if you don't mind, to panelist. Makumba Ignatius.
I just promoted him, so he should be coming on.
Great. Mr. Makumba, you should have control of the floor.
All right. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate it for inviting me to this symposium. And can everybody hear me?
Yes, very clearly. It's very good.
Okay. Yeah, so I will basically focus on the policy implementation priorities related to securing land and resource tenure, and also look at areas of coordination and the integration among the ministries, and also talk about the importance of integrated planning. So, of course, the mandate of the Forestry Department is to look at protected forest areas and also forests in open areas. And we are also guided by the Forestry Policy of 2014 and the Forest Act number 4 of 2015. Now, previously, before 2015, the legislation and the policy did not allow, so much involvement of the communities and the forest-dependent communities. You know, we had taken an approach of policing until 2014, 2015. That's when now we made a shift to seriously look at how local communities can actually participate in sustainable forest management. That is the reason why the Forestry Policy of 2014 and the Forest Act of 2015 provides for community forest management and also joint forest management. Like it was said, it's one of the pieces of legislation which is unique globally. You never see something of this sort that we have in Zambia, where we have decided that user rights must be transferred completely to the local communities, and they decide what to do with the resources around them, and then the department only provides technical expertise in sustainable forest management. So what we do is that we work in collaboration with other ministries such as the Tourism and Arts, Department of National Parks and Wildlife. And what we did also is to provide for recognition of the community resource boards within our legislation as the groups which can be identified as community forest management groups and participate in sustainable forest management. We collaborate with the local government through the integrated development plans so that we have some sort of an integrated approach in planning for the resources and including land. We also work together with the traditional and chiefs affairs in the chiefs, you know, trying to encourage them to be able to provide support to the local communities. We work with agriculture and also livestock and fisheries to look at the other livelihood activities that would actually help and contribute towards sustainable forest management. So at the moment, working with some communities in Eastern Province, Muchinga Province, Northwestern Province, and also working with the private partner in the name of Biocompany Partners. We have more than 1 million hectares of forest, which are potential areas for community forest management. And what we do is that we transfer the user rights to the communities, then the communities can decide to transfer those user rights to the private sector to bring in investment to further enhance sustainable forest management. And what we've seen is that there's a lot of excitement from the traditional leadership to want to engage into community forest management. And what we are doing as a department is to try to facilitate these arrangements so that we move away from government total control of the forest to community-led sustainable forest management, and also ensuring that there is direct benefits accruing to the communities. Previously, what used to happen is that revenue would be collected, taken to the central treasury, and then, you know, remitted to the local authority. But what we are saying now is that the communities themselves, they will be able to collect monies from the forest and use these monies for community development activities. So I think basically in a nutshell, that's what we are trying to do. So I'll be happy to answer any questions so that I can further elaborate and clarify. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Makumba, for that, that presentation. I think it really solidifies some of the questions that people have been raising. And it's quite interesting, as you say, that within the context of the Forest Department, user rights under community forest management are fully devolved to communities. And you're talking about a rights-based approach. We heard Dr. Simakonda mention benefit sharing in the wildlife sector, where government retains the actual rights to wildlife. Certainly in the mining sector, it would be similar. So as far as community-based natural resource management, you know, the lessons from the forestry department right now are probably going to generate a lot for us to learn across across the country. So very much appreciated. And we'll come back with some questions in a bit. Individuals are writing in about soil fertility and agroforestry and that sort of thing at the moment. But I think your presentation really did highlight the integration between these natural resource sectors. Also, it's really quite interesting and great that the CRBs and the community forest management groups can have similar rights over managing resources. There were some questions on the side about the dangers of CRBs being personalized and in general governance of CRBs. Some of those lessons will certainly come out of the presentations in the next week or two. And I think USAID and many other cooperating partners are really glad to work with the Forestry Department and Wildlife Department on governance in CRBs. I think some questions have come in from the side for Dr. Simakonda as well, relating to GMPs changing and wildlife transfer and community benefit. So feel free to look on the side for those. We're going to try again for our final presentation and then hopefully open up a chance for a little bit of discussion amongst the panelists. From His Royal Highness Chief Kaputa. As previously mentioned, Chief Kaputa is the chair of the House of Chiefs and also has had a long career previously as a mining engineer and has worked in government as well. So I think to sort of wrap up the formal presentations today, it would be nice to hear the reflections from the chair of the House of Chiefs, particularly understanding this relationship between customary leaders, government, and the communities and people who both of these institutions serve. So I can hand it over, Chief Kaputa. Yes, we can hear you. It's a little bit fuzzy, but let's try.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm making a shared presentation on management of natural resources, and I begin with some introduction of what the House of Chiefs is. The House of Chiefs is established under Article 169 of the Constitution of Zambia, Amendment Act number 2 of 2016, consisting of 5 members from each province in Zambia, making a total of 50 members. The House of Chiefs is responsible for performing the following functions as provided for under Article 169(5) of the Constitution. I'll say that again. What's happening?
We can hear you fine. You may continue. Oh, although, yeah, your video has a screen in front. There we go.
The technology is playing some tricks here. I said that the House of Chiefs is responsible for performing the following functions as provided for under Article 169(5) of the Constitution of Zambia, Amendment Act number 2 of 2016. To consider and discuss a bill relating to custom or tradition referred to it by the President before the bill is introduced into the National Assembly. B, initiate, discuss, and make recommendations to the National Assembly regarding socio-economic development in the province. D, initiate, discuss, and decide on matters relating to customary law and practice. And D, make proposals on areas in customary law that require codification. And E, advise the government on traditional and customary matters. And F, perform other functions as prescribed. Now, coming to natural resource management, it is important to note that individual chiefs have placed their own priorities in natural resource management and conservation. Natural resource management and conservation can be achieved under a credible traditional leadership. Chiefs are important partners in natural resources management because of the influence they have on the subjects and passion to conserve resources for the benefit of their people. Chiefs maintain leadership in their chiefdoms with full customary powers and take up advisory roles for community-based organizations such as Community-Based Natural Resource Management, CBNRM. Some of the chiefs involved in CBNRM activities are Royal Highness Chieftainess Mwozo of Itaste District in Central Province, His Royal Highness Senior Chief Luembe of Nyimba District in Eastern Province, and our Royal Highness Chieftainess Msoro of Mambwe District, also in Eastern Province. There are also a few Royal Highnesses that are venturing into game ranching. Now, the role of traditional chiefs in natural resource management is all-embracing, covering both land and water-based natural resources, including forestry, fishery, and wildlife resources. Chiefs support natural resources conservation campaigns in their chiefdoms and provide customary guidance to natural resources management. They provide guidance using indigenous knowledge on cultural aspects, which is often overlooked, and the development of national policies and legislations. In providing this guidance, traditional leaders help to preserve this traditional knowledge and values of the country. Due to the influence chiefs have on their subjects, they are in great position to protect natural resources against illegal harvesting activities. The subjects have respect for chiefs and traditional customs, rules and beliefs, and therefore, once a chief supports a conservation initiative of natural resources, then it is likely that his subjects will follow. This is also true for conservation efforts that are brought in by international and local NGOs and the government. As custodians of natural resources, chiefs advise on effective resource use and conservation. Through the traditional system, chiefs are able to discipline community members that do not follow the rules and bylaws. This does not only provide for the wise utilization and conservation of natural resources, but also protects the local communities from getting into conflict with the law due to illegal utilization. The customary land tenure system places chiefs as the custodian of the land on behalf of their people. With this, they guide communities and their institutions on issues concerning land zonation and land use requests by the private sector. This supports conservation for tourism purposes and for the benefit of the future generations. Chiefs advise the government on development needs in their communities and also facilitate the establishment and implementation of land use management plans. Zambia is blessed with immense natural resources, such as underground and surface water, among others. All this water is stored in rivers, lakes, streams, and swamps, and chiefs have the capacity of encouraging public-private partnership, PPAs, and the development and operation of irrigation schemes in chiefdoms where there are water bodies, and also facilitating construction of at least one large-scale dam, a chiefdom, for irrigation, so that their subjects can have access to water for their livestock, especially in high cattle-rearing regions of southern, western, eastern, and central provinces, and also promote the production of vegetables, fruit, and outgrower schemes in other areas, as well as promoting stocking and restocking of natural water bodies with fish stock. Agroforestry and organic farming also has high potential in this country. Advantages of working with traditional leaders in conservation and management of natural resources. First bullet point is chiefs have the capacity to mobilize human, financial, and material resources for natural resource management in their chiefdoms by ensuring that the youths and women are incorporated in programs such as forestry, energy, and fisheries management. Traditional leaders conserve resources for the present and future generations. They recognize the importance of fisheries, forestry, and wildlife in creating economic prosperity and beauty in their chiefdoms by making sure that forest reserves are conserved and managed properly, and control deforestation through encouraging their subjects to use sustainable agricultural practices. Traditional leaders have authority over their subjects with regard to implementation of natural resource management, for example, land. Land as a factor of production is critical to chiefdoms' social and economic development. In Zambia, customary land constitutes a larger percentage of land in the country, and it is therefore important for traditional leaders to promote security of tenure for customary land by promoting good governance and transparency in land administration, thereby curbing illegal allocation of customary land in their chiefdoms. As patrons of wildlife CBOs, chiefs are able to concentrate on their traditional and customary advisory roles and the development of their chiefdoms by ensuring that growth in resource-based tourism is environmentally sustainable and should be accessible to future generations. Chiefs can also ensure that local communities share responsibilities of management in community partnership parks and game management areas. This is an enhancement of community benefit from wildlife resources. Chiefs' involvement in wildlife activities can also enhance the employment of village scouts to increase rural employment once management areas are established. And I think I'll end there. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chief Caputo. Appreciate that that reflection and the description of the role of traditional leaders at influencing behaviors at the local level and the ability of traditional leaders to really lead by example, and we appreciate your partnership. I think two pieces that you mentioned really sort of resonated there. One is that you really do have the boots on the ground through village head persons and advisors to lead in the enforcement and the behavior change. We've seen in the past decade so much positive change, particularly related to gender and the role of women, based on the leadership of customary leaders and their leadership structures. I was wondering if you can sort of reflect for a moment on what you think is needed in order to make sure that the examples, for example, of Chieftainess Masoro and others who are taking a leadership position can be duplicated across the 180 plus other chiefs around the country. How can the successful examples of good traditional leadership and good chiefdom management be replicated? Oops, and we'll have to take you off of mute again. Great, we can hear you now, or we should be able to. Great, we can hear you. And the question was really about how to replicate the successes that are happening in some chiefdoms across a greater collection of areas and customary institutions.
Yeah. I think the only way I can think of is to get these Royal Highnesses who have performed very well in these areas to meet up with the others in a kind of workshop or so that they are able to share their experiences and to allow the others also to learn from them.
Great. Yes, and I think these types of events are really the first step in helping to encourage that sharing. And Zambia being such a vast country, it is logistically challenging. And so I think it's a great approach to ensure that we make the best use of opportunities when chiefs are together, and really any of us are together. So thank you. It is, and we've been together for an hour and a half today. We have 4 more hours this week of presentations, tomorrow and the next day. So I don't want to hold us here for very long, but I did want to give the chance for each of the presenters to reflect for a few moments on any questions that may have emerged or any anything they heard from other presenters that lit a light bulb in their head. I think the issue that we continue to grapple with every year is that Zambia has largely pretty good legal frameworks, and the law speaks to each other. We have a situation where customary leaders are respected and have a great deal of authority and ability to enforce and influence behaviors in rural areas. And yet, year after year, we continue to see forest loss, wildlife not necessarily recovering at the rate we would like to. And yet, we continue to push. And it may just be that Zambia's lands are so vast and it is very difficult to communicate and get into each of the corners of the 110 plus districts. So I'd love to hear, even from our panelists, any example that they think that they've seen that's a positive example worth following and duplicating across the country as well. So I'll allow each presenter in the order they presented to just come in and reflect before we draw this session to a closure. I also note there have been a number of questions posed, both in the questions and answers and in the chat box, and we will follow up in the meeting notes with specific responses to each of your questions, though the presenters are welcome to refer back to them. And there will be meeting notes following this month of presentations. Apologies to make you wait. So with that, Ms. Sawale, do you have any thoughts or conclusions out of this discussion on the way forward?
Hello.
Hi, we can get you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. As a way of feedback and conclusion, I'm just looking at the questions on the chat. Basically, the questions that we're getting as Minister of Lands are those of the land policy. And what I can say is that the validation process took place, and I think people were hoping would have a meeting, but because of the COVID, we were unable to bring people together. However, we were guided by cabinet that we can ask the stakeholders to validate through written submissions, and we got those. There were over 100, and so internally we started looking at them one by one, putting them into thematic areas and clustering them according to the format of the policy. And basically what I can say is that most of them were taken care of. And so we are at the last stage in terms of the ministry looking at the policy document. And then there was a question whether the external stakeholders would look at the document again. That is possible, but they were also part of those that submitted written submission. So probably this is the reason why it keeps on going forward and backwards. So it's not a problem to submit it to the technical committee, but what I can say is that it's moving forward, and in the next months we look forward to it being, finalized. So otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Swale. Maybe just a brief reflection as well. And, it has been great to see for the past, I guess, 7-8 years that I've been involved in this process, just to see that the trust between various partners has seemed to increase, and it seems to have been a positive process recently. The other quick question I think I saw on the side was the National Land Titling Program, and whether there's any sort of update on its progress and activities. And we'll hear more about that next week during the actual presentations as well.
Yes, Matt, I wouldn't want to preempt the presentation by our manager from land titling, but the last time we met to have a meeting, I think we were looking at how we can move forward. And today we had the meeting with the people that are working with us. And what I can assure you is that we've looked at all those issues that are delaying the production of titles, and we're moving forward. I think those that are following what we've been doing as Ministry of Land, you realize that we've actually done better and moved forward. So reserve your questions for the presentation that's coming specifically on the titling. And I think all I can tell you is that we've moved forward from where you probably are. And I think the presentation is going to be circulated.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. So those questions, you're welcome to come next week for anybody who wants to learn more about the titling program and the process there. So perfect. Thank you for that pitch for next week's session. It should be enlightening. And we'll get into technical details next week as well. Ms. Munthale, if you can maybe reflect on some of the questions that came in about the IDP process and the progress made, and even the extent of consultations and partnership. I've noted over the past years a movement. Early days, we were hearing the ministry or the local authorities will plan for customary areas, and it seems increasingly that the dialogue has changed to will plan with. And the focus on consultation has really come to the surface. So happy to hear any reflections you have on that process.
Thank you so much, Matt. I will reflect on that, but I just wanted to highlight a few things that came through the questions. And I think one of them is on IDPs, and particularly if there's any monitoring framework in it and how we view it. I just wanted to say that the development of IDPs based on the Urban and Regional Planning Act and the guidelines that were recently developed has just begun. And using those guidelines, unfortunately, we don't really have any IDPs that have been finalized, but we do hope to have a number of them finalized this year and probably signed off by the minister. And we are looking at the whole lot of Southern Province, Eastern Province, and Northwestern Province, a few in Lusaka Province and Northern Province. So based on the old processes, we have about 14 IDPs that are currently active. So I thought I could answer that. And I think there was also concern on issues of customary land and the boundary issues. And I wanted to state that as a Minister of Local Government, we do not deal with the boundary problems that may exist. That is a responsibility of the Surveyor General's office. And for us as the Minister of Local Government, the boundaries are as determined by the Surveyor General. So the people that could help, should there be any boundary disputes, would be the Office of the Surveyor General, because they're the ones that determine the boundaries and provide the maps. Having said that, also noted, I think, a bit of concern on the customary land and the delay in the development of the local area plans for customary land, as well as the planning agreement. I want to state that there's been a lot of active engagement with the traditional leadership, and in some areas we do have a very positive response. So we do, I think Shimuyunji is one of the areas where there's been expressed interest for the planning authority to consider planning for some of the traditional land. So yes, it may have taken long because there's a lot going on in these traditional areas. However, I think to the positive, the fact that this process is beginning and will soon be developing guidelines to guide the planning of these traditional areas, I think it's a positive, and we do expect a lot. I just want to state that in terms of planning, I think there's been an increased level of integration. One of the things I must state is that, for example, the IDPs being developed and in Eastern Province are being supported through a project that is being implemented by Ministry of Lands and Ministry of Development Planning. So there is a lot of integration that is going on right now. And there is a lot of sensitizations and engagement with our traditional leadership to ensure that they appreciate what is going on. And as Matt stated, I think more and more there is, instead of imposing development, we are more into talking and into discussions and agreeing on what is best. So that takes a bit of time because people have to appreciate. But I think generally there is some positive that we have seen using the new Urban and Regional Planning Act. But engagement is continuous, and we are continuously engaging the traditional authorities and all other partners that play a critical role in integrated development plan. Otherwise, I think there is more and more integration. Thank you, Matt.
Great, thank you so much. Very true, and a great evolution over the past few years of learning by experience. You know, some of the chiefs who've been involved in Eastern Province that we've watched, it's been really great to see those relationships develop and helping to bring together the different stakeholders who they work with. Now, for Dr. Simakonda, any brief closing thoughts? There were a couple of questions that have come up over the benefit sharing and how to make it work, and sort of how to make the GMPs more actionable, I guess, in the context of large portions of the country really becoming more agricultural in some ways, places that were, you know, that are within the game management areas, but for recent years haven't really been being managed as game management areas. And then any reflections sort of on the CBNRM trajectory, but welcome any closing thoughts, Dr. Simakonda.
Yeah, reading through the questions, I see that there are more than 13 questions, and I've tried to group them. So maybe, excuse me if I may maybe leave out some aspect of the questions. So
Yes,
I'll
of
try
course.
to
You can summarize.
maybe them in a generic sense. The principle is benefit communities sustainably, but they must live a normal life, not imprisoned, a normal life that is compatible with the resource that supports them. And so the general management plans that are put in place, they are strictly meant to guide management of those resources so that the resources are sustainably used. So the plans are reviewed, I would say, every 5 years is like a mid-term review. It's a minor review. And then a whole review comes after 10 years. So the GMP expires after 10 years. However, if you see anything that is really unworkable, you can still call on the stakeholders and really review it, even if it is 6 months after. If something doesn't really work, you can still call and say, this really was not thought carefully. We need to go in reviews, 5 years and then the 10 years. Somebody has asked, how compatible is mining with wildlife? I think it sounded more like it's an impatient question, but I can understand that, the impatience in the question, because I think the impatience is in all of us, that the way mining has been taken is almost like it's the only resource that really can save lives of people. But I think that is a result of only the background that we have. And we seem to think that that's an easier way. However, if you put resources on the scale and maybe value them, it is possible that you would actually value natural resources in some situations to be better than the wasting asset. However, the sense is, should other resources be frozen if attention is paid to wildlife? Not necessarily. They should be used sustainably in a way that does not interfere with wildlife management. So if it is mining, let it be done in a manner that does not interfere with wildlife management. And let it be in a zone which has been classified as mining can take place. Now, of course, there are many questions that you would ask after that, but that's a general guide that it must be compatible with. So the question that you can hurry to ask is, where is the compatibility? It only comes when you have a plan, and therefore you don't really mix up the two. I think the same person that questioned that said, are you not really insinuating that you can only manage for wildlife and anywhere else? I would say, yes, that is implied, be countered with understanding by the communities that this resource that has moved from a conservation area into a development zone should actually not be taken as an absolute intruder, but it should be understood that it can be in such an area and it should be spared unless it becomes destructive to resources and it becomes a danger to people. Benefits. Somebody has asked a question about whether we have taken into account of the article in the Constitution, I think he quoted it as Article 253H of 2016 that says investments on land must benefit local people. And principally, that's what we really emphasize upon, that whatever is really derived in these areas now is that wildlife alone may not really be sufficient. And we must start to think more widely. Can we think of minerals? Can we think of fisheries? Can we think of many other resources in the area so that they benefit people? Community game ranches is also another area that really is being encouraged, not in GMAs and in national parks, not in those areas, but in open areas. Say these are for game ranches. We are encouraging that a great deal. We are yet really to loosen maybe the rules about the process of setting a game ranch so that local people can rather be encouraged, and maybe the task of establishing a game ranch is not as difficult as it is now. So we are loosening that in process. I think it may be difficult for me to answer to every question.
Yeah, I think that's adequate, Dr. Simakonda.
Most of them have been covered.
I think you have covered most of them. Yeah, thank you. And I think, again, you know, just as Ms. Sawale, this provides a good introduction to our meeting in 2 weeks, where we will indeed talk about issues of community game ranches, benefit sharing, and planning around wildlife and forest management. I will hand it over to Mr. Makumba from the Forestry Department for any final thoughts. There were 3 main questions that came that are probably too large to address in the last 4 to 5 minutes. But, you know, the questions that came out were the cost effectiveness of community forest management groups, how the country will be able to deal with rampant deforestation, and really the control of charcoal from customary areas and across the country. Mr. Makumba, I don't expect that we'll have answers to all of those right now, but I hope folks will join us in 2 weeks to discuss, and I'll let you have a few minutes for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I can try to respond to those. You know, what it is that what we have discovered is that following the rolling out of the community forest management regulations, we have seen a lot of excitement among the community members and the traditional leaders, to such an extent that where we have identified these areas, the communities themselves have taken up responsibilities to protect those areas and to prevent people from going into those areas to cut down trees for charcoal production. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a lot of excitement. Now, the issue is that when it comes to benefits and costs, it will be shared between the government, the communities, and also the private participants. So we are hoping that it will change the sustainable forest management landscape in Zambia from policing and total government control to community participation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think that really reflects the distribution of benefits, costs, and responsibilities. And really, that probably is the answer to many of our resource management challenges.
Just to add also, I would like, because I've seen His Royal Highness Chief Kaputa as the chairperson of the House of Chiefs, I would want to encourage His Royal Highness that share the information with the other traditional leaders to say there is this opportunity for the traditional leadership and the community members to take charge and manage the forests which they depend on so much, and not wait for government to decide what to do. So we want to encourage them that come forward, and the forestry department will facilitate the creation of the community forest management groups. And I would also want to encourage the other government agencies like Department of National Parks, local government, and the Chief and Regional Affairs, that we are willing and able to collaborate and coordinate this arrangement.
Outstanding. I think that point of information sharing is absolutely essential, so that local government is going together with Forest Department, with the DNPW, and with the traditional leaders. We'll only have success in these areas if they're being led at the local level and being asked for. So that's a great call to arms, and something I hope we come back together with. For final thoughts, Chief Kaputa, do you have any closing thoughts? And the two big questions that came up were, how do you see the role of women? I mean, that's a huge, huge question, but what success have you seen recently? And then finally, what do you see as the role of traditional leaders going forward? As times are changing, how do we continue to modernize and make the institution responsive to current needs? In just 4 minutes, thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. But let me start by agreeing with what Makumba said. I've taken note of what he said. But allow me also to say that, you know, despite the so many advantages that we have as traditional leaders, we face one major challenge. And the major challenge is that we have no direct legal and recognized roles in the resources management, although we can send representatives to the community boards. For example, in wildlife and forest management, you know, once licenses and permits have been issued to operators by government, traditional leaders have no ways and means and authority to monitor the field activities, to verify the authenticity of and adherence to license and permit conditions. Concerning the involvement of women folk, I think it's our desire to allow them full participation in the resource management in our chiefdoms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really is an interesting reflection on the legal roles of customary leaders in natural resource management and what happens after agreements are signed. How do we ensure that that license and obligations and commitments are held up? It's you know, a very important question, and something that requires, it would seem, dedication by communities, traditional leaders, and government. With that, we have 2 minutes of closing. I thank you all with deep sincerity for coming together. This first meeting is just a snapshot of the overlapping issues in resource management and in customary governance, in resolving longstanding land tenure documentation needs in Zambia that we believe can only happen if these multiple ministries and stakeholders come together. As noted, over the next 4 weeks, on Wednesdays and Thursdays from 13 to 15, we will have presentations from government partners, academics, implementing partners, NGOs on their experiences and observations from across Zambia. Tomorrow's presentations will focus on governance questions and management and institutional relationships. Next week, we will be diving deep into the land documentation, systematic documentation, and customary land administration. In 2 weeks, we will focus on the relationship between natural resource management, forest, wildlife rights and benefits. And in the final week, we'll focus on how this all comes together into integrated development planning and the current experiences with customary documentation or customary local area plans. Thank you all. We will keep these questions and answer them directly on the side. A really deep thanks to each of our speakers today. You all will receive various texts just to remind you in sending a link. Apologies if it's too much, but you can always ask to be removed. We'll send you a text with the links to the various meetings coming up so you can join. And please do share with your friends and colleagues. If you found this to be useful, if you find any one of the other sessions to be useful, please do join. So with that, a deep thanks to USAID, to Department of, or Ministry of Lands, Natural Resources, Department of Forestry, Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and the Ministry of Local Government, and of course the House of Chiefs. We look forward to continuing a partnership with you in the future, and hope everyone has a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Bye.
If there is a mistake, I will say that